And yeah, it's really a privilege to work with these guys. And obviously, if I talk about Ben a little bit more, he's been a leading figure in the creation of this environment, in the creation of this community. I feel really privileged to have come across we crossed paths 6 years ago when we started the meetup. So, and that relationship's grown since then. He is definitely a thought leader, particularly in digital, in social enterprise. He's always talking about social enterprise and B Corps and really helping social enterprise startups actually get their business off the ground. So he knows how to do this stuff. He coaches this stuff. That's his bread and butter. And he doesn't do it because he needs to make an income. I mean, yes, he does, but at the same time, he's doing it because he cares. And you'll never find someone, or it's very rare you'll find someone that will care more than Ben. I think he's very much community focused, and he puts a lot of time into others and their outcomes. So Ben, it's really a privilege, and I'm really privileged to be able to introduce you to the community today, and for you to share your wisdom on what you do, some of the coaching styles, some of the practices and frameworks that you use, and really drive some interesting, drive a bit of curiosity and ask some curious questions and challenge us a bit today to find out what may matter to us. So I'll hand over to Ben, and thanks again for sharing your wisdom.
Might be getting carried away on the wisdom, but thanks a lot for the kind words and intro. And great to see you all. So looking forward to having a chat over the next little bit about solving problems that matter, and specifically social enterprise in a design thinking in a social enterprise sort of startup context. Tonight's also part of Spark Festival. If you haven't already checked out sparkfestival.co, check it out. Next couple of weeks are full of awesome events, and this is one on the program. So definitely go check it out. There's plenty of awesome things coming up. So I also just like to acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging also. A very brief bit about me. I normally describe myself as a designer, innovation coach and founder. My whole focus has been around strategy, design, tech, consulting, and a big focus on designing and leading and delivering strategic change, which has been kind of my life for almost 3 decades now, surprisingly. So the way I spend my time is Dynamic 4. And then also I'm a founding board member of the Social Enterprise Council for New South Wales and ACT. So we're the peak body for social enterprise in this area. And I'll talk a little bit more about SECNA, which is the much shorter way of saying that, towards the end. And as Lucas mentions, I'm in the final stages of launching my book, which is Solve Problems That Matter, all about designing, building and launching a social enterprise idea. But Dynamic 4, we're a social enterprise and B Corp, and our whole focus, everything we do is based around design and innovation for happier communities. And the main way I spend my time, it takes different shapes, but it's all about coaching leaders to solve problems that matter and helping them solve problems that matter in more empathic and innovative ways. And that's for the purpose of trying to help create the conditions for people and communities to be more empowered and inclusive and live in sustainable ways. So that's all about me, and I don't like talking about myself, so we're going to talk about you. If you've got a phone and you're not already on Zoom with it, hit that QR code. Otherwise, that's menti.com and then that code. Keen to find out who's in the room and what your relationship is, if any, with social enterprise, including what now? And with some luck, this will live update. Yes. So we've got one social curious, awesome. We've got a veteran. We've got a couple who are going, what are you talking about? Which is awesome. Let's move to a few. Oh, we've got a clear winner so far on curious. Awesome. So that gives me a bit of a sense of who's in the room and where you're at, and keep that open because there's another one coming up in a moment. But I kind of anticipated that response. So thankfully, the questions that I'm going to focus on are there or thereabouts, which are, what are these problems that matter and why should I care? How do I actually go about solving them? And then how do I actually make it happen and get it done? So they're the three questions that I'm going to touch on as we go through. So kicking off with, what are these problems that matter? And I'm not here to tell you what problems matter. I'd like you to tell me what matters to you. So what are the things that you really care about, and specifically phrasing it in the terms of what's that change you want to see in the world? That wouldn't it be awesome if this was how we all lived? So if you take a moment, hopefully still on that same Menti, and chuck in what's that change you want to see in the world. And remember what you wrote, because we're going to build on that shortly as well. No rubbish on the beach, good. That sounds like Luke. All brands good for the world. And I suspect our only veteran in the room. Racial justice, better access to national policy, being together while we are apart, very timely. Human to human connection, definitely missing at the moment in a lot of ways. Equality and fairness. No more sexual abuse, especially with kids. Zero carbon emissions. Doing it for the kids. My son has a future that he can be engaged and can afford. A more fair world, more empathic officials. World peace, that's good. We're setting our sights slow. No wars anymore, awesome. Excellent. So it's interesting seeing, and as you, after you've written, sort of have a look at what's scrolling through, and you'll probably notice there's some common patterns and themes there. I'll give it another couple of seconds. A Fed ICAC. Yes, that would be interesting. So hopefully you saw that a lot of those things map together pretty nicely with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so I'm sure most people have probably seen the SDGs over the last year or two. They've become very sort of popular and getting more and more mainstream. They've been around for a little while now. I think it was 2015, the current sets, and with a 2030 target date. So when you start looking at some of these themes and the goals, we've got some pretty significant systemic problems and challenges that we need to take on. And no one individual or organisation or government can do this. This is something that we all need to work on together. And there's plenty of things that we can do, no matter what our situation, to be aligning our efforts to help progress these SDGs. And there's organisations as well, like Catalyst 2030, which I'm proud to be a member of, which is a global organisation collaboration, bringing together social entrepreneurs, social innovators, to then look at how do we collaborate globally at a organisation and being able to agitate for change with corporates and government leaders as well, and into the UN, to actually progress and achieve these goals. So if you're not already familiar with the SDGs, recommend checking them out. The SDG official website is really detailed. So there's these high-level goals, and everyone sort of knows the icons, hopefully by now, which is awesome. But under each of these are some meaningful targets and measures. And over the last year, they've also been updated with what the impact of the pandemic has been as well, and how we're tracking and what we need to do to be able to start making more progress. Number 17 is all about partnership for the goals. It's all about collaboration. And that's a big focus that I like to work on and try and help spread the word and get more people interested in and actively working towards it, even if it's just in your personal life. There's plenty of things we can do as citizens to be able to progress these things. And social enterprise, I think, is a really powerful tool to help progress that. So the question of what's a social enterprise, for anyone that's sort of deep in and around the social enterprise sort of sector, this question sends shivers because there is no universally agreed definition. And it's normally the start of a very robust conversation around definitions and boundaries and what's in and what's out and everything else. I thought I'd put what's social traders, so they're the certifying body in Australia. They've recently updated this, their website and their definition as social enterprises are an innovative breed of businesses that exist to create a fairer and more sustainable world. So that's a pretty broad umbrella. And obviously they're a certifier, so there's a whole bunch of attributes underneath that. What I find more useful than thinking about it as an entity or a noun is focusing more on what the well-established and universally agreed principles of a social enterprise is, and thinking of it more as something that we do rather than something that we are, an entity. It's outside of certain peak body memberships and certification. That stuff isn't particularly productive. And if we focus more on a social enterprise idea, no matter what the legal entity, and in Australia there is no legal entity for it, the key thing is you have a clearly articulated social and/or environmental purpose. So it starts with that intent. You need to be able to demonstrate and have that meaningful intent. You'll also notice there that despite it not being the name, social enterprise is very much about the environment and climate action, not just social justice and equality. And then one of the key ways that social enterprise then delivers on that purpose is business, selling a product or service as a key source of revenue. And that's actually using market models as a way to deliver on that purpose is a key part of what a social enterprise idea is about. So I'll try and mostly use the term social enterprise idea, get away from the language of using it as a noun. I still find that really tricky, but that's kind of the focus. And it's really about having that clearly articulated purpose, and then a paying customer who is then going to buy your product or service, and then that's a virtuous loop. And even thinking beyond social enterprise, just business in general now, the whole expectation of what a business is and what it does is shifting, and has shifted pretty dramatically, especially in recent times. So especially if you're getting a new idea to market, if you're purpose-driven explicitly or a social enterprise, that's not even exclusive to that territory now. It's if you're launching a new product or service or a new business idea, operating ethically and sustainably is now pretty much a ticket to the game. If you're not doing those things, it's very hard to attract people, customers who want to buy your stuff, talented people who will come and work with you because they want meaning, fulfillment from their work and life, because they're the one and the same. Investors increasingly don't want to put money into things that are hurting people, exploiting people and polluting the planet. That's just bad risk. So just taking a operational, financial, reputational risk perspective, you'll see over the last 18 months or so, a massive shift in access to capital and where capital is going by investors. The biggest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, has been increasingly saying for the last several years, if you're not doing the right things by the people and the planet, you don't get our money anymore. And everybody wants to be in BlackRock's portfolio because they have a lot of cash. So Larry Fink, the chair and CEO, said January last year, he signaled this is going to be the biggest asset movement and access to capital movement. And then January this year, he went, and it's happening even faster than they predicted. COVID has actually accelerated these macro trends, not slowed it down. And so we've got this massive opportunity, no matter how you look at it, to actually use business as a a powerful good and to create a positive impact. So we often talk about triple bottom line, which is obviously everyone knows about measuring business success in terms of profit. That's kind of traditional business, but triple bottom line then also equally measures success in terms of outcomes for people and the planet. And so it's bringing those three things together, which actually the combination of those things is a sustainable business. Just having the financial sustainability sorted, if you're polluting the planet and exploiting people, no longer a sustainable business model, and it's definitely not risk-free. So triple bottom line is becoming the way to think about things. So theory of change is a term that's not used so much in traditional business. It's starting to be a little bit more, but it's really a way to then have some logic that hangs together of going, so you know that change you said you want to see in the world, that vision state. So that's one end of it, normally to the far right side. And then we'll do these things to achieve that. Working out what it looks like to actually achieve the change that you're after. We often express as a theory of change, and one of the ways of articulating that is a logic model. And what quite often happens when doing this is people will go, I really care about this thing, and so I'm going to create this solution, and then there's no apparent link between what that idea is and how that creates positive social environmental impact that they're looking to create. And that's where I think you should be a little bit more explicit here in step 2, and then a miracle occurs. And it's then a miracle occurs in that middle part. That's the part that we're going to start having a think about. How do we actually design and build and launch solutions that is the miracle, but how do we find out what the miracle needs to be? So as a bit of an example, and we're going to build on what you put as your that change that you want to see. So I use dynamic 4 as an example. So the change, as I sort of mentioned some of this at the beginning, organizations and leaders solve problems that matter in more empathic and innovative ways, and they measure their success in triple bottom line. And even that's not an end in itself. It's so that people and communities have increasing quality of life, they're happier, and they live on a planet that's cleaner and healthier. That's everything that we do on trying to line up against that long-term outcome and impact. And then sort of going, okay, so that's where I'd love to help us get to. Why aren't we there? What's the problem, and what are the causes to that problem? And my theory of it and the way I perceive it, and especially as it relates to something that I might be able to help do something about, is that the way businesses have operated for the last 250 years has been really key in creating and worsening a lot of the problems we experience. It has also lifted a lot of people out of poverty and created a lot of positive outcomes for people as well, but not everyone. And there's definitely been a lot of polluting and exploiting people that's gone along the path there to the benefit of a small number of people, executives and shareholders. So that's kind of hopefully you can see there, the change that I want to see, and then what I've identified as the problem and some of the root cause of that problem. So your turn, in your head, on your phone, on a notebook, whatever, taking that change that you want to see. So you started with what do you really care about? What's that change you want to see in the world? And what's it look like when it's been achieved? So hopefully you had a bit of a sense of that. And then if you think, what's the problem that you want to work on that would help create positive change? Why isn't that a reality today? What's the problem that's stopping that being a reality? And what are some of the causes? As you think about that, who experiences this problem? It's normally, well, there's always some people in the mix that this problem is impacting. What's the context that it impacts them in? So get specific about what's that context. And what do you know right now about the systemic causes of the problem? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to jot down, and based on what you identified, what you think the problem and cause might be. And depending on what you're looking at, some of it might be pretty obvious. It might be something that you have lived experience of. But when you're looking at the problem, have a think about, are you going deep enough? Is the thing that you've started identifying in your head the actual problem, or is it a symptom? And if you have found the problem, or you think you have, what's the cause? And it's where you can use things like root cause analysis or issue mapping, 5 whys, fishboning, as ways of sort of digging down and trying to go, yeah, but why is that the case? And when did that happen? And why did that happen? And drilling down to get to well below the surface, well below the symptoms, into the meaningful problem that needs to be investigated and researched and discovered. So a key thing that we talk about here as well is zooming out to see the system. So it's easy, hopefully it was relatively easy to come to, I want this change, this awesome thing to be reality. The problem that we've got is this and this, and you got down to some level of what the problem is and maybe some ideas around what the root cause of that problem is. If you then zoom out on what that problem is to see what's the context it lives in, what's the system that it lives in. And we live and work and play in adaptive, complex systems. So there's many cause and effect pathways with lots of people and interconnected moving parts, lots of levers and incentives in the system and feedback loops. So when you're doing this kind of thing, it's important to identify what you think the problem is, the cause, but then also map the system and understand the systemic levers and conditions that are at play. One thing I just wanted to raise as well is thinking about problems. And it is a key word in the title of my book, so I thought I'd better address this one head on. What is a problem? It's a situation that's harmful and needs to be dealt with. A lot of the types of problems that we are talking about won't actually be solved, not by one person and not in a short period of time. So taking a look at, with those problems does come opportunity, and there's some mindset and reframing that plays in there. But a lot of these types of problems that we focus on with social enterprise ideas is to progress them and make them better, not necessarily that they're going to disappear. So having some realistic expectations, and we're definitely not going to do any systemic change solo. So there's a lot of collaboration required in understanding and being realistic about the moving parts involved. Some of the other things, looking at how that system's changed over time and what the big patterns and trends are. One thing to always be mindful of is what might be some unintended consequences. So you pull a lever in one part of your system and someone else is pulling another thread over another part of the system. And then invariably, with any systems change, there are some people that it doesn't work out well for. So we at least need to be mindful of those and be designing with those in mind. We can't be paralyzed by fear and do nothing, but we do need to be mindful about all of these. And a key thing, especially once we've mapped a system, is it's going to be full of assumptions. You know, sitting at our desk, even having conversations, researching stuff, mapping it out, what we think the system looks like, it's just riddled with assumptions. And some of those assumptions, when we go test them, are going to be shown to be really dumb. And if we had to start layering solutions on top of those faulty assumptions, the whole thing would have fallen down. So one of the things that I'm always sort of on repeat is, what do you feel your riskiest assumption is right now? And what are you going to do to go and test it? So that's just a constant loop. And what a risky assumption looks like at different stages of this journey will evolve. So when you're first exploring the idea of what is this problem? What are some of the causes? What system? You're going to have a different set of assumptions to when you're now understanding a person's lived experience within it. And then when you start exploring solution ideas, you'll have a different set of assumptions. So the assumption's always there, but how do we test them? And one point that I really want to emphasize, because sadly I do hear this language, is please never see people as a problem to solve. So it's a surprisingly common language in this space. So that deficit thinking is really harmful to the people involved, and that doesn't actually get to the real problem or its causes. We need to bring empathy and understanding of the systems when working in this space. So to sort of fill out briefly that we've got that vision, that change we want to see, we've done some identification on the problem and its causes. And then in the case of dynamic 4, and then a miracle occurs, middle part. The simplified version, there's a much bigger version, is that if business leaders solve problems that matter in more empathic and innovative ways, and they measure success not just in profit, but people and planet as well, then that will actually result in people having better quality of life, the planet being healthier. So spend a lot of time on what are these problems, but if we don't have clarity on what the problems are that we even first start exploring and what our relationship with it is, then we tend to get lost pretty quick, or we just jump straight into solution mode on something where we're nowhere near ready for solution thinking yet. So being clear on our own purpose and our relationship with this problem that we're exploring, once we've got that clarity of purpose, everything else is a lot easier. And at least how we articulate that purpose is something that's likely to evolve over time. But hopefully you can at least think about, what is this problem and why do I care? What's my relationship to it? What's my purpose to doing something about it? So moving on into how do we actually solve problems that matter? The first thing is, I want you to be happy. And that's not just because I like you. It's also because when we're happy and our mindset and mood are positive, we're smarter, more motivated, and more successful. Sean Akel says, happiness is a center and success revolves around it. So it's flipping the formula that most of us are conditioned to believe, if not all of us, that if we just achieve this next thing, then I'll be happy. If I just do this one thing better, then I'll be happy. And so Sean Akel talks about we're constantly pushing happiness over the cognitive horizon. We're constantly moving the goalposts and then chasing happiness, whereas we need to start with happiness and then success follows. And to quantify that from his happiness research, where they tested in a whole range of professions and areas of life, including surgeons, when people are happy, they're 30% plus more effective and productive. So when they're in a positive headspace, they're a third better. So if you're going for a surgery, try and find a happy one, because they're going to be 30% better at their job. The good thing about this is it's not just this fleeting thing or mood of happiness. Sean Akel talks about it as a work ethic, that we create our own happiness. And one of the things I love about his work is he's really practical in the whole bunch of happiness habits that we can all build that are all pretty simple to actually be able to help create our own happiness, which plays pretty heavily into growth mindset. And Professor Carol Dweck's awesome work and her book Mindset and all her research, which is awesome. And if you haven't seen it, it's a TED talk from early 2010s called The Power of Yet. Definitely worth a watch. Where just that mindset shift of putting yet on the end of it, so if I can't do it yet, is a significant 3-letter word and a demonstration of a complete different mindset and approach to things. So mindset is just our belief or attitude that influences heavily how we think, feel, and behave. The growth mindset is very much focused on when things go wrong, there's a failure, it's actually an opportunity to grow. Challenges I actually seek because I grow from them. Feedback is awesome because then I can learn and do things better. And I like to try new things. Whereas when we're in a fixed mindset, we're kind of the opposite of that. And a lot of it's around the belief that our qualities are fixed. You know, you're either good at it or you're not. You're kind of born with it. You can't take it much further than that. But all the neuro research actually shows that that's not reality. Neuroplasticity has shown us over the last decade or so just the power of how much the brain changes constantly, and neurogenesis on top of that is another amazing area of research. But that fixed mindset, in reality, we all experience it, and different things will trigger us into a fixed mindset about certain things. So one of the key things is then being able to build up that self-awareness, that metacognition, thinking about thinking, how observing and understanding how we think about things, and then what are some of the things and triggers that will cause us to flip into this fixed mindset. By being able to build more self-awareness, we'll then start giving ourselves a bit of a buffer to be able to go, this trigger happened, or I anticipated this trigger was going to happen, and now I was able to take action so I don't end up in this negative space. And things like, simple things like breathing, but not from the upper half of your lungs or the top third of your lungs, actually full diaphragmatic breathing completely changes your brain chemistry. Basic mindfulness and meditation completely changes and starts building up some space to be able to respond rather than being in this fight or flight or freeze mode of constant reaction. So there's really practical, simple things that we can do. If you have a look at the greater good in action, which is out of Berkeley University, so it's GGIA. If you Google that, they have a website, and the Greater Good Science Centre as well. But they have just a huge number of free resources available on happiness habits and things that we can practically do that take very little time, a little bit of experimentation to see what works best with you. But there's a 30% gain in being more awesome on the other side of being happy and doing the positive things that we can all do to create our own happiness. So problems, challenges, there's two broad types of challenges. There's technical challenges and there's adaptive challenges. And most common leadership failure is that we try to apply technical solutions to what are adaptive challenges. And so technical challenges are when there's a clearly defined problem, we're mostly dealing with facts. An expert or an authority can just get it done. If you think about the change that you want to see in the world, how much of it's technical and how much of it matches more on the right-hand side of the adaptive challenge, where the problem is actually really complex, and even defining what the real problem is actually pretty hard. It's not like an authority or an expert can come in and solve it for everyone. World peace, we've had experts and authorities trying to do that for centuries, thousands of years, but it's actually up to the people to implement their own solutions. Takes a lot longer, requires collaboration, and it tends to be a lot more resistance because it means that we have to change our attitudes and beliefs and behaviors. And when we ask that of ourselves and others, that means change is more challenging, and it's where adaptive leadership and adaptive mindset comes in. And that's the segue to design thinking. So as a key tool to be able to get in and apply some of these approaches, the definition I normally use for design thinking is it's just a human-centered approach to innovation and solving complex problems, especially. And despite it not being in the name, it is as much about thinking as doing. So doing is a massive part, if not the majority, of design thinking as an approach. So hopefully everyone's pretty familiar with the double diamond. I think one of the most beautiful shapes ever created came out of the Design Council in the UK in the early 2000s as a really simple way to abstract the design process as a way of solving problems. So design is just a problem-solving approach. And so by being able to simplify it down to this shape of, there's a problem diamond where we're looking at, are we actually solving the right problem? And there's a solution diamond, is it the right solution for the problem that we identified? And we go through a stage of diverging So when we're in a problem diamond, we're gathering information, exploring, discovering, talking to people, and we can't do that forever. So we need to converge and make sense of it. We get to the point in the middle where we now hopefully have this really sharp clarity. And based on that clarity and understanding now the real problem to solve, which will always be a bit different to what we thought we were starting out with, at a minimum, we'll have a new mental model and language around it because we've spoken to the people who are actually experiencing the problem. Now we go through another divergent process of exploring many possible ways that we might solve that problem. That's where we need to resist not just jumping to the solution idea we had when we started. That's what most of us tend to do, is we'll go do some research, then we'll go and build that platform that we thought about on day one anyway, even though some of our evidence might have led us to actually there might be these other ways that we could solve this problem that might be more meaningful. And then as part of the conversion process in the solution diamond, that's when we're prototyping, testing, iterating, and refining. And in reality, we go through lots of diamonds all the way through. So we're always collecting a bit, making sense of it, collecting a bit more, making sense of that. And it's simplified, but I find it a really powerful mental model for thinking about the problem-solving process. So thinking about that first diamond, the problem diamond, which is my favorite, and the one that everyone wants to skip over and get out of as quick as possible, because it's where there's the most uncertainty and discomfort. We don't know, and we don't like not knowing. So we tend to jump this process and try and get to making up solutions because we feel more comfortable and certain there. But for me, the problem diamond is all about understanding the people, the problems that those people are experiencing, and the context that they're experiencing them in. So that's that first diamond, and it's all about getting clarity and building that really deep empathy for the people, the problem, and the context that you're focusing on. Einstein is attributed, at least, with the quote of, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and just 5 minutes thinking about solutions. And the point there is that when we've got this really sharp clarity on the real problem to solve, then solutions come quick and easy. I think most people by now would have seen the Cognitive Biases Codex, over 180 documented cognitive biases. This is a pretty awesome codex, and if you look it up on Wikipedia, it's an interactive version as well, so you can drill down on each of these biases to get more information. But this is what our head looks like. We've all got our own version of these biases that have been shaped by our own lived experience. And the good news, hopefully, is that every other person in the world has their own version of that. So we're all dealing with our own view of the world, which is shaped by how we've lived so far and how we've responded to it. And that's tuned our cognitive biases. So when we start thinking about our ideas, even if we've got the lived experience of it, if we're just thinking about what's in our head, at best we're a market of one, not a good sized market. So, and then other people are going to be experiencing in other ways. And that's why we need to go out there and talk to the people who you think your ideal customers are, because we're full of assumptions. And we need to have assumptions. We're always going to have incomplete and inaccurate information. There's no such thing as perfect information. If we waited for that, we'd never do anything. So we do need to make assumptions, but we need to do them mindfully and identify which ones are the risky ones and go test that thinking quickly and continue testing that thinking as we iterate through. So this whole process is really about dealing with complexity, with the people. And when we're dealing with people, we need empathy. We need to build up that really deep understanding of how people think, feel, behave, what motivates them, how they make decisions, what's important to them. These are things that we really need to build a deep, meaningful understanding of. And there's three types of empathy. There's the cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. And the neuroscience actually shows that these three different types of empathy activate different parts of the brain. So they actually hit different brain centers, but then they layer on top and work together as well. So the cognitive empathy is that seeing things from other people's perspective, which is often the word or the phrase that people will use when I ask them, what does empathy mean to you? Most would say something along the lines of being in someone else's shoes, by which I know they mean seeing things through someone else's eyes and taking their perspective. If you're just in someone else's shoes, you've just stolen someone's shoes, and that's not much good to you. But at least it's an attempt at language of going of doing some perspective taking. I'm seeing things from a different view, which is awesome and a critical part. That's where we'll start building up understanding of people's mental models and the language they use. But without the emotional empathy laid on top, it's also where mass manipulation and sociopaths live. So even sociopaths can develop cognitive empathy. They can understand your mental models, your language, and use that to manipulate you. If you don't have the emotional empathy, then that's a risk. The emotional empathy is then going that much further, where I now feel with you. And so it's an emotional connection beyond just the intellectual cognitive function of it. And then the compassionate level of empathy is, I've done the other two, and now I'm moved to do something about it. I can see you need help. There's a situation where I can help, and I now need to take action. So when we're talking about social enterprise and social impact space, this is the area of empathy that we need, where we're actually moved to take action. And we've all got it. It'll be about different things, but we've all got some level of that compassion, well, most of us, unless we're a psychopath. And it's a muscle, though. It's something that we build over time. And a lot of that starts with self-awareness. It's very hard to build empathy from a place of not being self-aware and not being in a positive mindset. When we're closed down and defensive, it's very hard to be open and building empathy with others. So as part of building empathy, we often talk about doing customer research and customer interviews. One of the key things when we're doing this is to talk to the right people. If in the case of looking at a business model and exploring a problem, if you're not talking to the people who actually experience the problem and those that you think are one of your ideal paying customers, you're talking to the wrong people. You need to be talking to the people who you want to work with and help. And it's amazing how many social enterprise founders I've worked with and founders of commercial startups as well, who might be several years in and have never spent time with their target customer. And then they want to have them pay and use their services. And then they wonder why their product's never adopted. But especially in the social impact context, we really need to be building meaningful empathy with the right people. And off the back of that, we have much better chance of designing and building solutions that people will actually want to use and pay for and solve a meaningful problem. I'm going to skip through this in the sense of time, but that's part of that opening out divergent process as part of the problem diamond. We can't do that forever. We've got to make sense of what we've heard. So, some basic things like debriefing after each interview, making notes of keywords. Some of this is down to that cognitive empathy of what's the language they use, because language does shape our worlds. So specific words and phrases, making note of those and being able to understand the context of when they're used, what they mean to the person saying them. A key thing is to look for patterns. It can be really easy to go, well, I heard this one thing, so I'm going to chase this one data point, which often tends to be a reinforcement of our cognitive bias. And so we're kind of chasing the thing that we heard that we liked. But even if we're just chasing single data points, that's not a good place to live. We need to be looking for themes and patterns. Through that synthesis of all the things that you've heard and making sense of it, it's then being able to find what those key themes are, but getting down to some real insights, and off the back of that, some opportunities. And then having a fresh, meaningful level of what the real problem to solve is, the problem that really matters. And that's the point that I mentioned before at the midpoint between the two diamonds of really sharp clarity. It's now clarity that's built on meaningful insight and evidence and empathy. If you haven't spoken to at least 10 of your target customers, you shouldn't be moving past this point. Let's say you have, awesome. And you've learned some awesome stuff and you've really refined your understanding of what that problem is to solve. You feel you've got some sharp clarity on that now. Now that time to go and explore that divergent process of understanding what are the different ways that we might solve for it, the solution and the business model. So this is all about getting clarity on what your solution concept actually is before you start building and launching it. What actually is this thing? How does it work? How does it hang together? What's the end-to-end experience look like and feel like? And then prototype and test and iterate. And so the early prototypes are conversations. They're sketches. They're a long time before any built product that you might take live. And you want to be able to iterate as quick as possible based on what you're learning. I love the phrase, prototype like you're right, test like you're wrong. So we can't just leave it all up in the air and go, customers, you tell me what you want. You've got to take a position and you've got to be able to articulate that in a way that you can test it, applying the scientific method. So you have to have something that you can take to people and go, my understanding is, and test that thinking. So prototype like you're right, you've got to take a position, but test like you're wrong. Scientific method is not, I want to go validate my hypothesis. It is, I will test my hypothesis. I'll have a testable hypothesis that other people can test using predefined methods and see if they get the same results. And I want to show to myself, and I want other people to show to me where I'm wrong so I can make it better. That's the mindset to bring into this. Unfortunately, it's become common language in the startup world over the last couple of years more that we seek to have a validated idea. It's semantic, but I think it's dangerous. If we go into this process seeking to have validation, we will find validation. Again, that confirmation bias is right there, ever present and really powerful. So if we're seeking to get validated, we'll find the data and the evidence that shows where we're right, and we'll be extremely optimistic, because you can't be a startup founder or social enterprise founder without being irrationally optimistic. It's a key trait required. Then we'll find all the evidence that we want to go, yep, my idea is awesome. My mum told me so. I'm building it. I'm going to invest 100K and the rest of my life on it. Don't do that. Prototype like you're right, but test like you're wrong. So the key question is then, how do I actually know when it is the right solution? And that's where the other iconic image from design of 3 lenses. So that view of what's desirable, what's viable, and what's feasible. And applying a design thinking, human-centered design approach, we always start with the people, which always means we start with desirable. What do people actually want? What motivates them? What do they find appealing? What do they actually think about the solution idea when it's an idea, not a built product or solution? Does it actually create meaningful value? Are we actually solving a problem that really matters? So we need to test that thinking, but we also then need to have the viable lens. So can we actually afford to do it? Do the numbers stack up? How much will people pay? How much can I expect to have coming in? Can I actually have more money coming in than is going to be going out? If you can't make that equation work on a spreadsheet, it will never happen in real life. So you at least need to have a financial model on paper as a prototype where you can find a way to break even in a reasonable period of time. And then the feasible, can we actually do it? Have we got the skills, or can we get the skills in to design, build and launch this thing and continue to run it after it is live? And are we the right people to be doing it? It's an unpopular question, that one, and we tend to think that we're the right person for everything. I know I do. But sometimes we're not the right person, or we at least need to be partnering and collaborating with some other people who are the right people. So the solution concept, explore multiple concepts, don't fall in love with your first idea. We all do it, but resist that urge. At least go through the process of exploring multiple ways to solve the problem that you've identified and got sharp clarity on. Start with how it actually works, do that human-centered design, think about the end-to-end experience before getting into the tech. And one of the key things here is the business model has to work and it has to iterate with the solution. One of the most common things that founders do, and I've done it myself far too many times, even though I know better, I haven't necessarily always done better, is we try to solve business model problems with product features. So we go, okay, no one's buying this thing, or I don't want to release it into the world. We just need this one more feature. It needs to be just a little bit more polished, or it needs this thing. Whereas we haven't actually tested the underlying business model. And if we did that, we'd find out that's actually that value prop, even as a statement, doesn't resonate with the target customer. So that needs to iterate before we even think about what the solution might be on top of it. And having said that, one of the key things we tend to do is we'll have just one more feature. It'll be just, it's really ugly and it doesn't quite work how I'd like, and it's not perfect yet, so I'm going to keep it in a dark room for another 2 years. The famous quote from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn: if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. So we have to do this in public. We have to apply our growth mindset and be willing to fail, and fail in sometimes public ways, and use that as a learning mechanism. We always want to do safe to fail experiments, especially in a social impact context, but we need to be out there doing it with people publicly. The number of startups that live in stealth mode and never come out of it, because if your idea can't survive contact with other people hearing about it, you don't have a startup idea. It's if you're going to be blown out of the water just by somebody hearing about your idea and someone can do it better and faster than you, you're not going to win, especially players that have got more resources. So, and there's always plenty of those. So being out there, being collaborative, doing it in public is a much better way to go. So the final question, home stretch, how do I actually make it happen? So this is all about getting into your rhythm of prioritizing, planning, and reviewing it. And the key purpose and objective here is to build momentum. So this is the area where things tend to be, it's a bit of planning and it's a bit of strategy, and it's starting to get down to, if I put this on paper, I start getting some answers that I don't necessarily love, and it can be quite confronting. So founders especially tend to do no detailed planning, or go the other way and do really detailed planning as a way to procrastinate testing the risky parts of their idea. What I recommend, and most of this I apply myself, and I've over the years built up a workable rhythm that at least works for me, and you'll need to experiment with what works for you. But it all starts with being really clear on your driving why. What's your purpose? That needs to be compelling, and it needs to be deep, because that'll be the thing that keeps you going when you hit barrier after barrier after barrier. If you don't have a clear driving purpose and why, and it's not just something that's on a post-it note on a photo somewhere, it needs to be embedded in everything you do and your value system alongside it. That needs to be meaningful, otherwise you'll give up at pretty early. And I think it was Steve Jobs that said something along the lines of, the key attribute of a successful founder is they persist. So you do have to be pretty stubborn. You have to keep going, and to be able to do that, having a very clear purpose and driving why is key. Another one, so right back to the beginning, that change you want to see in the world, that vision, it can be very easy to have that as that abstract thing, that 10-year big, hairy, audacious goal, the BHAG. Quite often that's left at this big abstract thing of, I want this awesome thing one day. For me personally, and other people I've worked with, that doesn't usually carry much weight and isn't particularly useful. What I recommend doing is actually start contextualizing it, wrapping reality around it and casting forward a bit. So I ask questions of myself and when I'm coaching people, of what's your life look like in 10 years? 2031, how old are you? How old are your friends and family? Where do you think you'll be living? What do you think some of the big macro trends are likely to be? What would you like your social enterprise idea to be looking like? Do you want to be working in it full time, or do you want to be having it as a side thing? Is this a big thing, or is this a little community project? It's get detailed and nuanced and paint that out as a picture, and then take that 10-year view and chunk it down to something a little bit more manageable, like 3 years. Now we can start making more concrete plans around that. And then bring that even closer to 1 year targets and plans, and using things like OKRs, which I'm not going to go into tonight, but I do in the book. So having clear ways to then be able to know what's this objective actually going after, and what are some key results of knowing how we're tracking against it. And not in a binary, I did it or I didn't do it way, which traditional KPIs tend to be more that headspace. OKRs, you're looking for a 70%. I got 70% there is actually a really good result. And so one of the key reasons I like OKRs over some of the traditional methods is it has a different mindset of what success looks like. So it's less about the binary outcome and then beating yourself up when you don't get to 100%. You can recognize success by getting to 50, 60, 70%. But all of this is about building your rhythm. And one cautionary tale, and Luke and I have way too many conversations about this over the years. Don't get distracted hunting for the perfect planning tool. It doesn't exist. And you'll trial every product out there, and you'll have a whole bunch of data in one, and then you'll move it to another, and then you'll lose some, and then you're just constantly trialing products. Perfect tool's not there. Focus on the content and the headspace and your personal rhythm, and experiment with your personal rhythm to make it happen. So other ways to make it happen. That's why I wrote Solve Problems That Matter. So it's based on, it's a 90-day program. It's based as a starting point, at least around 90-day program, all about how to take a human-centered design approach to designing, building, launching the social enterprise idea and getting into that rhythm to build momentum. So it's that whole life cycle. It's based around 90 days because that tends to be a good sort of frame of time to get through and build momentum. But in the first sprints, the sprint 0, people doing the program will actually adapt their timeline to what their personal situation. But having that as a plan, as opposed to just this ends thing that then takes 7 years and I'm still talking to the second customer. So taking that approach, and I've built this, I've written the book, and this is all based on our Jetpack program, which is an incubator for early stage social enterprise ideas. We started in 2014. So it's based on working and being through this cycle and iterated and refined over and over. And I've had the privilege of coaching thousands of leaders and designers and not-for-profit leaders and university students. So it's all taking all of that experience and running my own social enterprises as well, and putting that into an approach which I've found has worked. One of the other key things is doing a social enterprise idea, doing a startup can be really lonely. You can feel very isolated, and it's really important to go and find a community. That's part of those happiness habits. We need to be around other people, even if it's might be primarily virtually and by screen at the moment. That human connection is really important. So finding other people who are on a similar sort of journey or similar value systems, similar interests is really important. And that's where I invest a whole bunch of my time helping build different communities and ecosystems. A couple, obviously, you're here, SydDT, which we started almost 6.5 years ago now. It's amazing that it's grown to over 8,000 members. Definitely not what we thought would be the case when we started it. There wasn't really any thought, but it's amazing having an awesome design community and a strong focus as part of design thinking in SydDT around that solving problems that matter, complex problems around social environmental challenges. As I mentioned earlier, SECNA, so peak body for social enterprise and social enterprise curious supporters in New South Wales and ACT. If you're in Australia but not in New South Wales or ACT, if you go to ascena.org.au, that's the alliance at the national level. So all the state and territory peak bodies are a member of the of ASCENA, and on their website you'll be able to find the state or territory that you're in. We've now got national coverage, and I think Tassie might still be, they're in progress, but they might not have it up yet. Next year, Brisbane technically, but it'll be throughout Australia, we're hosting the Social Enterprise World Forum. So it was on just a couple of weeks ago in Nova Scotia, and next year, and all things heading hopefully in a positive direction or a COVID negative direction. It'll be a proper international event again with people in real life. So check it out, lots going on. And then there's the B Corp community as well. There's lots of other awesome design communities, CCX, EUX, IXDA, UX Book Club, Product Book Club. Shout out to all the acronyms around UX product design. Thanks, Kevin. And so it's awesome to have a thriving design ecosystem, and a heavy focus as part of that on having a positive impact as well. And so, question time. We're done for time. Whew.
Yeah, so that was great. I think what I might do, Ben, and I might hand off to people in the call who are willing to ask their question. But I know Kate, and I think you did answer this question, Ben, but I'll ask Kate's question around what are the best tools to evaluate or think about risky futures and unintended consequences. So yeah, interested to get your point of view. I think you did answer it, but maybe it's good to recap that.
The tools side of it, there are products out there, but nothing replaces the thinking. And even the products need the thinking. And as much as possible, not just having your own perspective. So finding some version of your team. In the early stages, you tend to be flying solo, but think about your broader supporter network and other people who would be willing to play in some of those conversations. If you can find some people who are actually a target audience to be part of those conversations, to really map the system, understand it, and some basic tools in terms of process more than tooling tools, then how to map a system is a useful thing to know. It is a pretty complex and rapidly becomes a very academic field. But just understanding here are the actors, the key people in the system, here are the feedback loops, here's the different levers and incentives in the system. This is a positive feedback loop, this is a negative feedback loop, by whose perspective, what are the boundaries on the system that you're looking at, where does that boundary of the system start butting up and interacting with other systems. It's all of that thinking that needs to come first. And then there are tools like Wicked Labs have out of Adelaide, Dr. Sharon. They have an awesome systems mapping and issues mapping tool, which will then look at network effects and things like that as well. But start on whiteboards or Post-its or whatever, and get the major pieces out and cluster them and find the themes, find the interactions between those. And I can send a link, it's actually in the book, but I can send a link as well. There's a couple of really awesome resources to guide you through the thinking of how to map the system and what the key questions to ask are and the key things to look at. Visualizing a systems map takes endless number of shapes. Most of them are very complex. And most of the value tends to be in the conversation and thinking of them as opposed to the output and the end artifact, because we're dealing with complex adaptive systems. And so by the time you got through that process of doing the research, visualizing it, something's changed or there's some better information. So the end output, like most design artifacts, is nowhere near as valuable normally than the process is normally, and that collaboration that happens during that is normally where 80–90% of the value is.
Maybe that's probably sometimes why big organizations struggle, because they'll see the insight and it'll take so many people so much time to convince people that we need to move in that direction.
And we tend to have a lot of design theatre where we like to produce beautifully designed artifacts to go on the wall and never actually be used and guide decisions.
Yeah, I think sometimes
Lean UX is one of my preferred ways of operating.
Yeah, there can't be a sticky note. That's a good tool for you. The good old sticky note. There's a lot of conversation that revolved around this question. So I think Jack Mack asked the question about how do you change the mindset from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And maybe there might be a few other opinions out there as well that people want to share. But it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that, Ben.
So a lot of it's around self-awareness, that metacognition. Even for some people, depends where you're at in that journey. For some people, it might be the knowledge of the science of neuroplasticity that our brain isn't fixed. It is proven, as much as science proves, it's demonstrated through research that our brain is completely plastic. Just the idea of when we think about something the same way, we carve out pathways in terms of neurons and connections, and we can carve out these pathways in the brain. So by consciously changing and thinking about things differently, we're carving out new pathways. And if we build that up over time, it becomes a habit, and that starts changing our mindset. One of the key things on mindset, sometimes it gets talked about as almost a personality type. You're a fixed person or you're a growth person. Most of that, I mean, the whole premise of the book is nothing's fixed. So we might demonstrate some of those behaviors and mindsets more dominantly if growth or fixed. But in reality, even if we predominantly operate in a growth mindset, there'll be things that trigger us into some fixed mindset behaviors, which tend to be more on the destructive side, where we get defensive or we lash out or we don't want to take any chances, we just give up. So a lot of it starts with the self-awareness, which things like the happiness habits, starting to build up some space to be able to understand what's happening in the world and how we interact with it, and turn off autopilot and make some active decisions around that is some of the key ways to start process, at least. But yeah, curious to hear other people's thoughts and experiences as well.
It's interesting how there's a lot of talk about actually changing the perspective. It's about getting out of your own perspective, which is what design's about, getting the perspective of somebody else and seeing it from their eyes, feeling it, and then acting on that. It's interesting how there's overlaps and convergence around that. But yes, I think we need to hear from other people in the group. There was a lot of chat about this in the chat when this question came up.
I'll catch up in the chat now.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything to share on that they want to share with the group? I went through my own 2 cents worth in there while I was. Does anyone have any questions to ask Ben that they want to speak up rather than listening to me monologue all night and Ben? There's more interesting people out there than us too.
Definitely.
Ben, when are you going to release your book?
It is, so the teaser is out today, so you can get a more detailed look at how it all hangs together, and a partial sample of a few of the chapters. Jackie's on the call, and she's my book coach and editor, and she hasn't approved said PDF yet, so there will be a new revision coming. It also hasn't gone to the proofreader, so it will be iterating. I am definitely viewing this whole thing as more of a product than a traditional book. The whole idea of having a static thing that's bound by print, I'm not a big fan of, because I'm learning every day and experimenting constantly. So I've, as a way of dealing with that, I've given myself a couple of outs. One is that the digital versions, the ebook and the PDF, will have multiple revisions, and when you buy the book, you'll get those for free with the new revisions. And then also linking back to dynamic4.com/SPTM for solve problems that matter. That's where there'll also be a whole bunch of other resources and downloadable worksheets. So it's very much a workbook. It's not a theory textbook, which the sample chapters are pretty text heavy, but less representative than the rest of the book. Most of it's learning through doing, but I needed to have a pretty chunky sort of sprint 0 with some foundational concepts and a lightish touch and some theory, because that's the basis and the foundation that we then build on throughout the book. So had to cover some of that stuff. Couldn't get away without it. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what we're talking about as we progressed into actually applying it on your idea.
Interesting on that. You've just done a whole heap of disclaimers, so it sounds like there's a bit of embarrassment about what's going out. So you've probably released at the right time then for your
I'll
first
always
iteration.
be embarrassed. There'll always be things in there where I go, oh, that's either said really dumb or, yeah, no, there's way better evidence or research out now, and that's just, that should be using this method now. It's way more effective. So yes, it will always be embarrassing because it's a snapshot in time and the world moves
Yeah, I
on.
like your concept, but so when's this teaser available?
It's available now. I will, I haven't got your email, I don't think, James. Flick me a message and I'll send you the PDF, but it will be on the website early next week. So you'll be able to download it from the website early next week. But if anyone wants it, you probably don't want to put your email address in the chat. You can send me an email at ben@dynamic4.com and then I'll send you the teaser.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to want to look at the teaser, and I think it's a wonderful idea to have something that can be constantly updated. Have you considered the thought of having perhaps a password protected area on a website that people can go to? And
it won't be password protected, it'll be freely available. So and I just found my bit.ly, so there you go. And you'll notice that even when I created the bit.ly, I preempted the fact that it wouldn't be the last teaser. So it's called teaser 1, because there will be a teaser 2 and beyond. So that'll save you sending me an email. I should have harvested your email addresses really, but flick me a message if you are keen.
Yeah, I've been involved with other people publishing things that need constant updating. It does take time. It does take you away from earning money otherwise, and people are very happy that they can get access to that information. I suggest that there should be at least some sort of a subscription.
Possibly in the future, but the whole reason I wrote the book and getting it out there is our jetpack program is pretty Sydney-centric. We do work with people across Australia and we do hybrid, but it's at a price point that doesn't necessarily suit everyone. And so this was a key way to be able to get some of the key content and program out to a global audience at a much cheaper price point, and as a self-serve, DIY. And then if people want some help, then there's always the coaching option. And then they might also want to do jetpack. And one of the things I'll be testing soon, I won't put a time on that, is the video version of the program. So a few people asked me if I was going to do an audio book. And my thinking at this point, at least, is no. I'll be doing a video version of the program. And another quick shout out. So I've got a bunch, but I'm looking for a pot of questions that people exploring their social enterprise idea might be, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now? So that will then go into a pot, a bit of theming happening at the moment, and then just, it's been on the to-do list for about 6 years or more to then do just some short video on YouTube replies and cover off some of those as another way to get some of this stuff out to people at free to low to no price point.
Maybe two last questions that I'm seeing in here. I think there's one that was asked twice. So what makes a purpose compelling? And as you close, Ben, because I think we probably need to close the call soon.
We do.
What, if there was one thing you could change in the world, anything in the world, but only one thing, what would it be? So what makes a purpose?
That was Omar, wasn't it? I think I saw Omar's question.
Yep. And they'd be nice things to close out on. The
one thing?
What makes a purpose compelling?
Okay, purpose compelling first. So
yep.
That would, will this work? That would be, it depends. Compelling to who? In what context? Why? I can't answer that question. I don't know who the people are that it needs to be compelling with and for. So if you sit in a dark room with your awesome purpose and this amazing value prop that you love, and you don't talk to the people that you think you're doing it with and for, then you're at a very high risk of being sad that no one wants it. So what makes it compelling? It depends. You got to go talk to the people who it's supposed to be compelling for. And then the one change is that people are happier.
Yeah.
Because off the back of that, all the other good stuff happens. Happy people solve problems, which means we end up being more empowered and inclusive, which is the other key part of my purpose. And we then solve problems and do things in more sustainable ways, so we have a cleaner planet to live on. But if we can get ourselves and each other happier, ultimately we can only get ourselves happier. No one else can make us happy. So if we can do that, we recognize that it's in our control and take the steps to build our own happiness habits, awesome stuff will come off the back of that.
Yeah, maybe I'm also wondering, there's probably a number of questions you haven't answered. Maybe should we try and collate these, and Kate, is there any way we can extract the questions and maybe just...
I can just save chat and I'll filter through them.
Yeah, then maybe we can respond.
And if there's any questions that you want to have answered in a video reply, then flick me a message at ben@dynamic4.com or hit me up on LinkedIn, which is probably a nice segue to that. If we're not already connected, let's connect. That QR code will take you to my LinkedIn profile. But yeah, keen to hear what's your biggest challenge, biggest question that you've got as it relates to social enterprise. And I'll be more than happy to help where I can.